Steve Jobs' haunting last words they don't want you to know. On October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs, the billionaire genius who revolutionized technology, lay his bed in Palo Alto surrounded by family. His breathing slowed, his eyes opened wide, and he stared past his loved ones. Then he whispered two haunting words, but we'll get into that later. You see, the man who created the iPhone, the iPad, and one of the most valuable companies on earth left this world not with a product launch or press release, but with something much different, and maybe even regret. What does a man like that see at the end? And what does it say about how we're chasing our own dreams? But before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan, and this channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. Now, sometimes I think the tension of that in my own life has been difficult to manage, specifically when seeing ambitious men like Steve Jobs, who've built incredible things that has impacted all of us for good and bad, while at the same time studying his life and where he was at the end of his journey. You see, I believe stories like Steve Jobs aren't far from many of us, though we may never build a company that's worth over $1 trillion like Apple. You see, we all feel a pull to be successful, to win, to make our mark or leave our legacy. But what if chasing the wrong things ultimately could get us to a totally different destination than we expected? You see, Steve Jobs reached the top of the world, yet his own words, his family, and his biographer tell a more complicated story. And that's why in this video, I want to show you what we can learn from his journey, what we can learn about ambition, what we can learn about who we all were created to be. And I want to ask you a favor. I want to ask you to watch till the end of this video, because I think there's something that is profoundly important and timely for all of us. And I'm going to give you guys a way to go deeper with me on this very important topic of chasing our dreams, but sometimes at the expense of our soul. So if you could, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed. We look at the back-end analytics of our channel and oftentimes see that a big percentage of the people who watch this channel regularly are not subscribed. And I want to make sure you're subscribed because we're on the verge of actually hitting a pretty big milestone here. We're on the verge of reaching 800,000 subscribers, making videos just like this one. And I would love to celebrate that with you. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at the journey of Steve Jobs. 1, his unstoppable and undeniable drive. 2, the regrets that he faced along the way. And 3, the lessons he left behind that I think all of us can learn from. Some of you guys may know Steve Jobs' story, but just to refresh, he's from San Francisco originally, grew up sleeping on friends' floors, eating every free meal that he could get his hands on at the Hare Krishna temple, and he began building computers in his parents' garage, selling his VW bus for parts money. His ambition was electric and contagious. You see, Jobs became famous for his intensity and infamous for his cruelty. He once brought his own engineers to tears in meetings, dismissing years of hard work with a single phrase: "This is sh-." He publicly humiliated team members when they disagreed with him. One engineer recalled being berated in front of a whole room. "You're worthless," Jobs said. Even as Apple grew, his obsession with perfection, it became toxic. He demanded impossible deadlines and berated those who missed him. He parked in handicapped spots because he didn't like walking far. He denied paternity of his own daughter, calling her mother promiscuous and claiming he was sterile, even after a DNA test proved otherwise. His selfish ambition alienated even his allies. One former colleague said he was brilliant, but he made everyone around him miserable. By his mid-20s, he was worth $100 million, but he kept pushing. Any normal man would probably say, man, $100 million, especially in the 80s, that's enough. And in 1984, the Macintosh launched. But it was late, over budget, and sales struggled. Jobs refused to listen to feedback, even telling his team, "You're either with me or against me." By 1985, Apple's board had had enough. His abrasive leadership, financial missteps, and inability to collaborate forced their hand. They stripped him of all responsibilities and pushed him out of the company he founded. Here's his side of the story from a Stanford commencement speech.
"I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I'd let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me.
Some say he was betrayed. Others say he sabotaged himself. Either way, his selfish ambition left him publicly humiliated and unemployed at 30. And yet, instead of quitting, Jobs started next and invested in Pixar. He said, "I still loved what I did. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love." And learning these aspects of Steve Jobs' story instantly made me think of this passage from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 26. Jesus is speaking, and he says, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" This also reminds me of the passage in Philippians where the Apostle Paul is writing, and he says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others." Now, I'm going to tell you guys a time in my personal life where I completely fumbled living this scripture out. And unfortunately, it was even on the other side of being a Christian for a bit. In 2013, I was attempting to release my first full solo debut album, and I had booked the monumental House of Blues venue. This is a historic venue where my favorite rappers like Tupac and DMX had performed. Some of you guys may not know, but before I did YouTube, I was a full-time artist, and this was as I was revving this up. So 2 years before I quit my job. And that night, everything was lined up. I had really hustled and worked hard to personally sell about 400 tickets. By the time I hit the stage, there's about 650 people there. So not a sold out crowd, but the room was definitely full. And I had this elaborate plan to debut this new album, half of which is still on the internet. The other half isn't. It's called Carry On. I only put out half of it because the other half was pretty bad. And I end up having a band, background singers, the whole bit. But the reality is that the album was rushed, the songs unpolished, and this was my first time performing many of those songs. And by the time my hour-long set ended, yes, I don't know what I was thinking trying to perform songs I'd never performed for an hour. But by the time my hour-long set was coming to an end, I couldn't wait to get off stage. Afterwards, I had processed with my pastor what went wrong. You see, I was in such a hurry to transition from being in a group at the time called The Breaks to try and be the front man and the face of my own thing that I had rushed through the process, often at the detriment of my own friends and my own community. In my selfish ambition, I completely lost myself. And in my upcoming book, Godly Ambition, I actually explore and I summarize that story with this line from chapter 2. What was meant to be a launch pad for my solo career turned into a stark lesson in humility and leadership. I go on to say, all of us have moments like this, when ambition shifts from godliness to greed. When we seek our identities apart from Jesus, we're prone to take good gifts, our time, talent, and treasure, and use them to glorify ourselves. We start out with good intentions, but over time, the lure of achievement or glory or pleasure subtly pulls us down a destructive course. By the time we recognize it, damage has been done. And the point of this book was really to share much of my story, but it's not just my story, it's all of our stories, to figure out how we can all go from selfish ambition to godly ambition. I'll tell you more about the book later. You see, when I went through that process at the House of Blues in 2013, the cracks of my story became more and more clear. The cracks of my identity became more and more clear. And thankfully, I was able to draw near to Jesus and course correct. Well, in Steve Jobs' story, it didn't quite work out that way, which led to the regrets that ended up haunting Steve Jobs. In 2003, at the peak of Apple's comeback, Steve was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer. He delayed treatment, trying diets, fads, and other alternatives, a choice he later regretted. He began realizing the things he overlooked. His daughter, Lisa, whom he once denied, his kids, who hardly ever saw him, his wife, Lauren, who quietly supported him through it all. He told his biographer, "I wasn't always there for my kids, and I wanted them to know why. But I don't think there's any degree of explaining to your kids why you weren't there that can justify for not being there. I think many of us kind of make these exchanges with our passions and our ambitions to, hey, I'm going to make short-term sacrifices because then one day I'll be able to be a better provider. One day we'll be comfortable. One day I could scale back. But the truth is, if you're driven the way Steve Jobs was driven, if you have that relentless zeal in you, odds are that one day never really comes. Or worse, it may come when it's too late, when your health has completely deteriorated, when your marriage is hanging on by strings, or worse, when your kids are grown and they don't even like you anymore. Now, in a moment, I'm going to play you a video of Steve Jobs opening up about his cancer diagnosis, how it began to change his perspective. But before we get there, check out what the psalmist says in chapter 90 of Psalms, verse 12. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. There's something to this idea of living our lives in a way where we understand that our days are limited, that we will not be here forever, that the things that we are enjoying now won't always be there for us. Our kids, our families, our physical health. And that when we learn to number our days, when we learn to think about the end, that it is actually how we gain a heart of wisdom. Now check out this clip of Steve Jobs opening up about that initial diagnosis and knowing that his days were numbered.
About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I live with that diagnosis all day.
Oddly enough, in that same window of time where I had my House of Blues moment, I also wrote a song called Paper Jam. And I think it's still on the internet somewhere if you search The Breaks, Paper Jam. And one of the lines in that song says, "What's worse, not reaching your dreams or reaching them and realizing they're not all you esteemed?" And I think that line kind of ties in what Jesus describes of gaining the world and losing your soul, of who Steve Jobs became in the process of being this hard-driven entrepreneur, and where my own heart drifted after writing that line. That I became so obsessed with becoming a solo artist that I did it at the detriment of my own soul. Way before I even achieved any of the things I was trying to achieve, just the drive to do it was not healthy for me. Now, those of you guys that watch me regularly know that I love a good redemption story. I think that it is beautiful how God can take the messes in our life and transform them into a message. And he's done that for me personally. But in a way, it seems like that happened for Steve Jobs, that he, in a way, left behind a final message around some of this stuff that many of us can learn and glean from today. Now, I'm not saying Steve Jobs was walking with Jesus at the end of his life, but I think any man that's accomplished everything that he has while at the same time coming to grip with his death being imminent is going to have some wisdom that we can take away. And in a second, we're going to look at his last words that he said according to his sister Mona, who was there. But before we get into that, I want to really drive home the point that at the end of his life, he stopped working. At the end of his life, he finally got his grip on what is important: his family, his daughter, the same daughter that he initially denied being the biological father of. Lisa, the same daughter he denied fathering and also repeatedly dodged getting a paternity test for. He discovered at the end of his life that that was actually his biggest accomplishment: having kids and family. And no one at the end of their life wishes they would have worked more. Most folks at the end of their life wish that they would have spent more time with their family. But the reality is that we still have to work. But do we have to work at the expense of our family? Well, I don't think so. In my book, Godly Ambition, which I'm telling you about because I really think this will help you move from selfish ambition to godly ambition, I break down our financial pursuits into two buckets. Bucket number one is every single one of us needs to learn to work to eat. The scriptures say that a man who not work ought not eat. But then there's another bucket that I think often many of us forget about, and that is the bucket to sow to reap, to sow for the next season. So many of us know we need to work to eat now, and that we should be the providers of our household. So that means there might be some skills you need to develop, some education, some relationships to expand your network. But it doesn't just end there, because in order to really create some form of stability and some form of inheritance, which, by the way, Proverbs says a righteous man leaves an inheritance for his kids, we also need to learn to sow to reap for the next season. You don't plant strawberry seeds today to get strawberries tomorrow. You plant strawberry seeds today so that you can reap strawberry seeds in the next season. And believe it or not, the scriptures are very frequent with this idea of agricultural metaphors, sowing to reap, so on and so forth. So I think there's a healthy tension here for us to learn to work hard, but not at the expense of our family, to learn to work hard and work smart so that we can buy back some of that time we really want with our families. So we could understand the ultimate impact and the biggest legacy we would leave behind is that of the gospel, which we shared with others, and what kind of family we raised while we were here. You see, I think that experience is the lowest form of learning. Constantly needing to learn from your own experiences and your own mistakes will lead you to unnecessary frustrations. It is good for us to learn from other people's mistakes. A smart person learns from his mistakes, but a wise person learns from other people's mistakes. And that's exactly what we're doing with examining the life and contributions and final lessons of Steve Jobs. That his drive built his empire, but that led to regret. And then he had these lessons at the end of his life. Lessons that were well documented, even up to his final words. This is what his sister Mona said his last words were as he looked past his family. They were simply, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Whether awe, fear, or a glimpse of the eternal, we don't know. But it was clear his focus had shifted from his empire to whatever eternity he was about to step into. And it begs the question, what good is it for a man to gain the world while potentially losing his soul? You see, Steve Jobs' life teaches us a few things. That ambition without God can cost you everything. That time is short and you don't want to waste it on the wrong things. And that legacy is not what you achieve, but what you leave behind. Now, if you want to learn from other people's mistakes, specifically mine, and the lessons from scripture that we can glean, I really want you to pick up my brand new book, Godly Ambition. You can get it at whatever retailer you prefer. We have links pinned below. It comes out September 9th. But right now, if you pre-order it, you can go to mygodlyambition.com. After you pre-order it, you can get a screenshot of your receipt, go to mygodlyambition.com, hit claim pre-order access, and upload your screenshot to get the first 3 chapters along with the intro chapter and an ambition action worksheet to help you work through how do you discover your purpose and your calling now. So this is available right now. This will get emailed to you as soon as you pre-order it. Again, the link is pinned up in the comment and in the description below. So click here to pre-order Godly Ambition. And if you want to know about the time the CIA launched a crazy experiment at Harvard that led to one of America's craziest domestic terrorists, we'll have that over here for you. All right? Peace.